it just feels like I'm doing so much meaningless chip damage just to try to attempt to get a kill. They always make the hit scan heroes better. They treat them better. They aren't dumpstered for as long, and they maintain their heroes' identities always, while the projectile heroes get the short end of the stick and get shit on by the awful balance that comes their way, unfortunately. And when you look at a hero like Genji, whose Dragon Blade did not get damage compensation, who Blade is now way, way worse. All they did was increase the swing speed. That doesn't help him with his breakpoints, right? Oh boy. Today, I'm going to rant a little bit about the state of DPS. I know we did a state of support video where we went one by one for a lot of the heroes, but today I'm going to be kind of covering some general topics after coming back from my break playing Marvel Rivals for a couple weeks and playing DPS over there, to then coming back to playing DPS in Overwatch 2 against the super tanks and the super supports. And man, let me just tell you, playing DPS has never been more boring. There's a lot of issues in the DPS role right now, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about a subject I've desperately tried to stay away from because I think it's a lot of speculation, but at this point, it's undefendable, undeniably true, and I'm just going to talk about the blatant, disgusting as a projectile player. Full disclosure. I play every DPS in the game, but I'm mostly a projectile DPS player. The absolute ludicrous hit scan bias the developers have. Now, what is hit scan bias? Hit scan bias, obviously, it is that the hit scan heroes in this game get preferential treatment from the balance team. They always make the hit scan heroes better. They treat them better. They aren't dumpstered for as long, and they maintain their heroes' identities always, while the projectile heroes get the short end of the stick and get shit on by the awful balance that comes their way, unfortunately. So yeah, let me talk a little bit about this real quick. And I'm just going to let out all my emotions out there. And I'm going to challenge Aaron and his team on some of the stuff they've said as well. Okay, so let's talk about playing DPS generally speaking right now. Playing against super tanks sucks. It just sucks. There is no universe where a tank like D.Va, for example, should be able to fly in for free and not be punishable because she has so many raw stats. Not to mention a better time to kill than a lot of the DPS heroes because they buff the damage on her micro missiles. So D.Va's unkillable. She's actually unkillable. Anytime that I end up in a situation having to duel a D.Va, which, by the way, before anybody sits here and tries to tell you that, oh, just avoid the tank, that's not possible a lot of the time in the game. Because the objective is where people fight a lot of the time in the game. And there are a lot of times where you actually have to fight on the objective. And the history of Overwatch has proven this, especially with a lot of those death ball comps that were very good and played the objective well. So there's absolutely zero play to make on D.Va. Even Reinhardt feels very, very difficult to kill because he has so much armor. And post Season 9, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, it just feels like I'm doing so much meaningless chip damage just to try to attempt to get a kill. I see more games nowadays, and I challenge anybody to look at the scoreboards that they have in their games, where you'll have like 5 or 6 limbs with like 5,000 or 6,000 damage. That never happened in Overwatch 1, ever. Or really, it also didn't happen as much pre-Season 9. And I feel like, aside from Season 7, where they just made supports way too good, cough Illari, who we're going to talk about here a little bit, who, by the way, is better than 80% of the DPS in the game right now. If you took Illari out of the support role and put her in the DPS role without her pylon, she would still be better than most DPS in the game. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. So the super tanks are unkillable, insanely unfun to play against. They get less headshot damage, have armor stronger than it's ever been before. Right now, one D.Va has the effective health and sustain of like 3 Overwatch 1 Zaryas combined. I think maybe it's closer to 2.5. That might be an exaggeration. But 2.5 Zaryas combined is what D.Va's sustain is right now. It is so boring. And ironically, I thought that 5v5 was supposed to be a format that gave DPS players more player agency. How do I have more player agency if I have to duel a tank that I have a 0% chance of beating in a duel? And now I have to duel supports as my only option, or DPS for that matter, that have abilities that are stronger than they've ever been before in the history of Overwatch, aside from Ana, who is the one support we didn't struggle to kill in Overwatch 1. BAP shift, way better. Pylon, 100% uptime. Never breaks. You can put it on an unbreakable angle, and you cannot contest it, while Illari does better damage than most heroes in the game. It just sucks. It's not fun. And I think anybody who's tried to play DPS against these super tanks have really struggled unless you play the burst damage hit scan heroes or Echo, who can really secure kills. Echo's a little bit harder postseason 9, but let's start to get into the nitty gritty here. So playing against these super tanks suck. Playing against Bap Illari, before I get into the nitty gritty of the DPS, playing against Bap Illari synergized together is unironically worse than playing against Double Shield, because the pylon quite literally is a third support. And what good Illari players have figured out, because it never breaks, is they can actually put it on an angle that you physically cannot break. You cannot break it on 80% of the cast in the game. Not to mention, she's already a better ranged duelist than 80% of the DPS in the game. So good Illaris have figured out where to put their turret on angles that lets them permanently pop out damage, and you can't contest them. You cannot break them. And even if you do break the pylon, she's shooting you the entire time, forcing you out. And even if you do break the pylon, get in a place where you can kill her, her Baptiste will then stack on her, drop his immortality field, which then you have to kill as well. So now you've had to kill 2 drones. And the reality is, Bap still has his shift, which will instantly burst heal everyone around him. Most DPS heroes in the game don't have enough fight uptime to be able to pierce those things on their own, or even sometimes with teammates. And it baffles me that Blizzard will sit there and talk about how tank synergies are oppressive, but never address the fact that support synergies were just as powerful, actually more powerful, because there were more triple support comps and more metas were caused by support syncing up than tanks. So why do tank synergies get sledgehammered, but we refuse to address some of the very, very obvious support synergies that have made the game incredibly unfun to play as a DPS player? And we've given you guys a couple seasons, but you still haven't done it. You have to address Bap and Illari syncing up together. It's incredibly unfun and boring to play against. It's not fun. It's unfair, because I have to kill a third support that's uncontestable. So as a DPS player, that feels really unfun. Now, that might only be a more specific high rank issue and not something that you guys have to deal with at home, though I suspect that's not the case. I think it's pretty easy to tell how good Illari is as a DPS hero, even though she's in the support role. And I'm totally fine with support players having options to duel DPS. The problem is she has an inherent advantage against every DPS she duels, because her pylon will never break on its own. If the pylon did not have infinite uptime, I could disengage and re-engage because she's made herself vulnerable. She's had to make a decision, just like every other DPS hero in the game, where if you have to use your cooldown to make something happen. And when you use your cooldown, it then goes on cooldown, meaning you are vulnerable, right? Like, you know, it would be like if I don't even know what analogy I would use here for this, but it would be like if Torbjorn had permanent overload unless you broke his turret or something stupid like that, right? That would just never need to happen. Just dumb. Nerf that. Okay, let's start talking about the blatant hit scan bias in the game. I'm going to start out with a couple of my favorite projectile heroes that have been left behind post-Season 9. Post-Season 9, it feels like I'm doing more meaningless damage as a DPS hero than I ever have in the history of Overwatch. Ever. A ton of the damage I do is meaningless because the tanks now only get 10% heal mitigation instead of 20. I'll never kill that tank. Never. Won't ever happen unless I have my whole team focusing them. Won't ever happen, okay? Individual player agency, gone. I thought that was supposed to be more of that in 5v5. That's crazy how that didn't work. So now, post-Season 9, let's look at the projectile heroes. Let's look at Hanzo. Gutted. Flushed down the toilet, flicked the bird, and said, fuck you to every single Hanzo player out there. Let's compare him to Widow as a sniper, okay? Widowmaker, more damage with her headshot, 300. Better range with her damage, okay? More consistent with her headshots. Higher scoped accuracy and higher scoped critical rate compared to Hanzo. So he's a worse sniper in every regard, and if you pick Hanzo against the Widow, you can one-shot the Widow, but you can't one-shot the rest of her team. But Widow can one-shot anybody on your team from better range with better escape options out of a dive, because grapple gets her all the way out of a dive. She can go all the way out. One dive can only get you one rotation, one set of cooldowns, but she can grapple all the way out. Hanzo can only leap. So Hanzo still is at way more risk in the duel. So he's worse at sniping. Can't contend the range. Okay, so let's see. He's more of a brawler now. We buffed his projectile size, right? He's more of a brawl character. Okay, sure. So let's compare him to the brawlers or the poke heroes. Ashe has hit scan storm arrow on her hipfire. Can shoot 2 shots with crits that will land before Hanzo can fire a second arrow to get a kill unless he has storm arrow up. So unless Hanzo has Storm Arrow up, his time to kill is significantly lower than every other hit scan who has better accuracy, better scoped critical rate, a better mobility option against dive with her coach gun, because she can boop targets away from her while getting away. So she's better at Hanzo at quite literally everything, and she's easier. But what about the ults? Bob, who just got the tank passive for headshot reduction, can hold an area and do crazy damage for like 10 to 12 seconds over time. Dragon Strike, the only thing they did was made it situationally worse by letting it move faster, meaning it can't do more damage over time to tanks, which is how it got a lot of value, was splitting tanks. And every squishy hero is either going to have an immortality or have a hypermobility ability, because this is Overwatch 2, and if every hero doesn't have the ability to do everything, oh, well, it won't work in this deathmatch style game. So he's worse there too. Same for Cassidy. Cass can 2-tap before Hanzo can 2-tap unless he has Storm Arrow. He's got a little bit more mobility, Hanzo does, but Cass's role gives him damage mitigation. They made High Noon way more flexible of an ult. He also has a stun to go against the dive and a fan the hammer that can tank bust. So Hanzo's worse at every level. He has no identity in the game anymore. Let's look at Mei. Tracer's been one of the best heroes in this game since Overwatch 2 came out. What made Mei unique and pickable in preseason 9 was the fact she could one-shot Tracer. They recently made Mei somewhat viable again after dumpstering her by not addressing her properly and balancing her properly post-season 9 by letting her at least 2-tap with a headshot body shot some DPS heroes. Anything that's 250 HP, she can 2-tap with the headshot body shot. But she cannot one-shot Tracer. So when all the best Tracer players are out there dominating on Tracer, and you can go look at the top 500 leaderboard, Mei no longer has a skill check to check the Tracer to let her be a viable option. A ton of these things in the projectile role were the only ways these heroes were actually going to be able to get played. Echo is even harder to play now as well, post-season 9. They might have made her beam wider, but her time to kill technically is actually higher now than it was before, because the big breakpoint for Echo Beam, which did not get a damage adjustment, nor did her primary fire, was getting a target to half health, and then you get your damage ramp. But because everybody has more health, it's harder to actually get to that breakpoint, and it's easier to hit an Echo out of the sky because the hit scan all got bigger hitboxes, and the heroes that are the most consistent have always been the best heroes in ranked. And because the hitbox sizes made hit scan significantly more impactful and consistent compared to the projectile roll, the disparity in the gap between them all grew even more. And when you look at a hero like Genji, whose Dragon Blade did not get damage compensation, who Blade is now way, way worse, and the Limbs Pretend and Overbuff show this, all they did was increase the swing speed. That doesn't help him with his breakpoints, right? They just did not adjust the projectile characters properly post-season 9. And there's actually a clip of Josh Snow, the lead hero balancer, saying 2 years ago that they never want to change, and we can find this clip. I might have to do some digging for it. So I forget who sent it to me. Maybe it was Wakia, one of my viewers, where they say they never want to change hero health pools because it messes with breakpoints too much and it just makes the game a mess. And why did they have to change health pools? 5v5, ladies and gentlemen. Good job. Good job. So it just sucks. They have not done a good job of bringing up the projectile heroes properly and making the role actually be even. And now there are some hit scan heroes who have suffered, like Soldier, who is unplayable against D.Va. Like quite literally, guys, genuinely, there should never be a situation where a DPS player in a neutral has a 0% chance of winning a duel. It should never be 0. Against D.Va and heroes like D.Va, 0% chance to win. But I thought that DPS was supposed to have more player agency in this game. And the answer is that no, you don't. You have to avoid the tanks now. It is a waste of time to shoot tanks. You will never kill the tank. Ever. 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 And so I challenge anyone to go play the 6v6 code. Not just because of 5v5, 6v6 really, but because of the health pools and the breakpoints. Like, it just feels like I have to churn through so much health, so many CDs, insane amounts of healing, just to, like, enjoy the DPS role at a bare bones level, when previously, even in Overwatch 1, when every ability was weaker, burst healing was weaker. Like, every support has burst healing now. It's fucking insane how, like, every support... Honestly, the only supports that are good are the supports that have burst healing or insane utility like Lucio. That's pretty much it. Like, Mercy's gone. Sorry, Mercy players. She doesn't have enough utility like on the fight to actually make her be consistently good, and she just doesn't. And so having to churn through these abilities just makes this game less of a shooter game and gives me less ability to express my raw mechanical skill. And I'm saying that as a player who hit like rank 22, one-tricking Reaper this season. I almost hit Champ 5 playing Reaper of all heroes. So I just want to say, like, playing DPS into these super tanks and super supports, it's just not fun. And I don't care how much extra space I get in 5v5. If I don't actually have better options in the duels, and every duel I have to take is significantly harder because the support abilities and tanks are unpunishable, that's not a better experience as a DPS player. It's just not, especially when my role has just been left behind altogether and it's just constantly second to hit scan. It's just so much easier for me to pick up an easy, brainless hit scan hero and autopilot down mid. And if you go watch the great DPS debate, Deku and Jay echoed the same sentiment where it felt like we were just autopiloting nowadays. And it's just not fun. It's just not fun, man. It's just not fun anymore. So I would say playing DPS is incredibly lackluster, super boring. A lot of heroes have been left behind. And every big promise that Blizzard made about Overwatch 2 for DPS players has come up to not be true. And I don't care what people tell you. Break it down piece by piece. They promised less hard counters in the game. Well, now if I'm not playing burst damage hit scan or heroes that have insane amounts of burst damage, it is significantly harder to secure an elimination. It is. Hard counters, still in the game, right? Again, for the most part, again, it's you have to play the top-heavy heroes is what I want to say. Like, the DPS role is more top-heavy now than it ever has been, and that's just not healthy for the game. Then on top of that, more player agency. My gameplay loop is more forced in one direction because most heroes are unkillable now than it ever has been, than it ever was in Overwatch 1. Even in the metas where the DPS role was not viable at all in pro play, I still had more options then to create opportunities than I do now. Just because I have the space does not mean I've been given more options. And Overwatch 2 has really failed the DPS role in terms of actually giving it fun, diverse options to express yourself. I'm just more limited now than I ever have been. And I really, really hope they consider reverting some of these tank buffs, nerfing some of the supports, and then in turn, you can just completely nerf the DPS passive too, because I want support players to be able to heal, especially if they're actively trying to make the right plays. But it feels like a lot of the support heroes get ult adjustments, get buffs or addressed or left OP, then half the projectile DPS heroes that are just left to rot time and time again with their identities destroyed, flushed down the toilet in a fucking despicable way. And it sucks and makes me so angry what they have done to Hanzo particularly. It is awful what this dev team has done to Hanzo. It is awful. Awful. Absolutely awful. Same for Genji. The Dragons trailer is the most viewed trailer in Overwatch history, and they have gutted both of these characters' identities while promising player agency. But the hit scans stay good. The supports, Brig gets extra bashes in her ult. A free fresh shield. Burst heal on Pxterz. Alari gets pylon the whole game. Ashe gets Bob having the tank passive. They make Dragon Strike move faster, which makes it less of a threat over time. High Noon gets to move around with super speed, but EMP can cancel Blizzard. Suzu's still in the game. Tanks are getting net buffed in mass amounts that we've never seen before. And where's my role? Pharah's good for half a season. Echo's time to kill is higher now. They did buff copy. I'll give them credit. Hit scan bias. So DPS is not fun. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I want to see them improve the DPS experience. I want to see Season 9 get reverted in a quick play hacked or something. I just don't think it was a good change. I want to see more of the heroes brought up to par. I want Genji to be back and viable. I want just some of these tank buffs have got to go. Why is D.Va a raid boss, guys? D.Va's a harder raid boss than the fucking PvE boss that you guys spent 5 years building. Unironically, D.Va is harder to kill than that giant little rhino boss that didn't change from the time I playtested it in 2019. Rest in peace, you know. Ludicrous. Ludicrous, 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 ludicrous. So anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching. This is a DPS rant. Let me know what you think down below. Do you like playing DPS right now? Are you noticing it's so much easier to play the hit scan heroes than it is to play the projectile heroes, especially post Season 9? I think that goalpost, I think that needle got moved a little bit too far and they need to rein it back in. But let me know what you guys think. I'll see y'all next time. Take care. Peace out.